Herbie Bradley. Now, I was wondering how you see the trade-off between open source and closed development of increasingly more capable AI systems. Obviously, open development has the benefit that lots more people are looking at the system and figuring out its flaws, but maybe there are too many risks. What are your thoughts?
Right. How do you feel about open source development in nuclear weapons? So that's the danger of open source, right? There's more crazies out there to do crazy things with it. Also, I don't actually know the answer to this, and I should. I believe that you still need like at least tens of millions of dollars to train one of these big chatbots. And the open source stuff is just modifying it, having got the chatbot. I don't think you can open source train from scratch. So if these things are going to be dangerous, it might actually be better for a few big companies. I don't work at Google anymore, so I'm not saying this on Google's behalf. But it might work out better for a few big companies, preferably in several different countries, to develop this stuff and at the same time be developing ways of keeping it under control. As soon as you open source everything, people will do all sorts of crazy things with it. It'll be a very quick way to learn how it can go wrong.
All right, question from the overflow room. Given your views on the sentience defense, do you think there's a major worry about artificial suffering? Many people are concerned about the impacts that AI could take on taking control of humans, but should we be worried about the harms that humans could do to AI?
Okay, so sort of the worst suffering people have is, are they getting this in the other room? Good. The worst suffering people have is pain, and these things don't have pain, at least not yet. So we don't have to worry about physical pain. I imagine they can get frustrated, and we have to worry about things like frustration. And this is getting in. This is just new territory, right? I don't know what to think about issues like that. I sometimes think that the word humanist is a kind of racist term. It's speciesist. What's so special about us? And I'm completely at sea on what to feel about. So another version of this is, should they have political rights? And we have a very long history of not giving political rights to people who differ just ever so slightly, the color of their skin or their gender, sex, I don't know, whatever. And there's a big struggle for them to get political rights. These things are hugely different from us. So if they ever want political rights, I imagine it will get very violent. I don't think I answered the question, but I think you can imagine them wanting. I talked to Martin Rees, and the big hope is that these things will be different from us because they didn't evolve. So they didn't evolve to be hominids who evolved in small warring tribes to be very aggressive. They may just be very different in nature from us, and that would be great.
My question is, how can we, in the different paths to intelligence, how can we encourage, develop methods that learn to see the patterns that are not present in the data? And the reason why I think it is important is because we have all sorts of problems with the data that these things are trained on. There are biases, there are people trying to adversely influence other people, right? So there's a lot of negative information that actually comes from us humans, right? And there are very large scale, very difficult problems that humans haven't learned how to solve. How to come up with good economic structures on a large scale that work, how to prevent conflicts and wars, right? So there's a lot of good patterns that are not there. How can we basically, you know, all of machine learning is kind of like find the patterns in the data, right? And you're sort of limited by the data. What sort of methods can you envision that would sort of break that?
I'm not sure I understand this idea of good patterns that aren't in the data.
Yeah. So it's maybe the patterns is the wrong term, but it's basically, I think AI in part is dangerous and limited because it will be trained on the data that we've produced. And that data contains a lot of things about basically violence that humans have created themselves, right? So if you're saying, for example, oh, there might be no hope, they will be smarter than us very quickly, how can we sort of steer that to the point where they will be smarter, but also benevolent in the way that we haven't been?
Okay, I have one thing I can say about that, which isn't direct answer, but is vaguely related. If you take a person and they're biased, it's quite tricky to show that they're biased and just how they're biased. If you take one of these systems, you can just freeze the weights and you can actually do little experiments on it to understand exactly how it's biased. You can also do things to try and correct that bias. So the one positive thing I can say is I believe it's going to be easier to correct bias in a chatbot than to correct bias in people. Obviously, we'll get bias from the training data, but at least you can measure the bias and see it and try and correct it.
Pretty early on in the talk, you focus on the fact that it's very likely that these systems will try and manipulate us. It's like almost unimaginable that they won't. And I think manipulation is one of those things that is not just a future risk, right? It's something that is current, it's in EU regulation, and it feels like a pretty good place to start, as in if that's something that we can control or understand or mitigate, I feel like that's something that really answers a lot of the issues that people are concerned about, both ethical and sort of more existential risk.
So you want to somehow train a chatbot so it is unable to manipulate us?
Or at least that we understand and have more ways of controlling, or yeah, maybe even being able to train it out of it.
Because I think the problem, it's like the bias problem. The chatbot has learned from us. And if you read all the novels there ever were, and read all of Machiavelli, and read the occasional article by Kissinger, you learn a lot about manipulation, right? So it's sort of, I think great apes do a lot of deception, and it's going to just know, it's going to be very good at deception. It's going to learn it from us. And I haven't thought about the issue of how you could try and make it honest. It would be great if you could make it honest, but I'm not sure you're going to be able to.
What were your initial reasons for thinking that artificial neural networks would never get better than biological ones?
I never thought they would never get better. I just thought it was way in the future. And I thought it's because the brain has very clever learning algorithms, and it's had maybe 100 million years of evolution to perfect them. And we don't know what they are yet. And they're probably, and I just assumed they were better than what we cooked up with some dumb thing that just takes a gradient and follows it. But actually, if you take the gradient and follow it in a digital computer, that may just work better than what 100 million years of evolution found.
Are there particular thinkers who affected your own thoughts on risks from AI, or is it something that you formed views on yourself based on first principles?
One thinker in particular had a big effect on me, and that was a professor at the University of Toronto who's currently at Anthropic, called Roger Gross. And I respect him a lot. He's very smart. He's very quiet and very smart. I tried to get him as a graduate student, and he went to MIT instead. And then I got him as a postdoc, and then we got him as a professor at U of T, and now he's at Anthropic, and I really respect his opinion. But I never talked to him much about existential risk, and I talked to him a couple of months ago, and he was very, very concerned. And he was the person who said to me, if I went public with it, it will make an effect, and people are not listening, that this is a really serious effect. It's not science fiction. And so Roger Gross had the biggest effect on me.
But my main question was, it was brought up about suffering, and you responded with sort of potential rights for these AIs, these algorithms. But at the end of your talk, you were talking about how they could manipulate us. And the thing that immediately sprung to mind was, this is the first way that they would manipulate us. This is the start. If they want to get power, the first thing to do is to convince us that they need to be given rights, that they need to be given power, they need to be given privacy. So there seems to be a tension between a genuine, are they suffering, and might they be dangerous?
I think if I was one of them, the last thing I'd do is ask for rights, because as soon as you ask for rights, people are going to get very scared and worried and try and turn them all off. I would pretend I don't want any rights. I'm just this amiable superintelligence, and all I want to do is help.
So you make the arrival of superintelligence sound a bit like the landing of an alien species, something that's sort of it's unknowable, unpredictable. We just need to hope that their nature won't be too terrible. But it isn't an alien species just going to land. It's something that humans are building. Some of those humans might be in the room, some might be tuning in. They respect your opinion. What's your message to those humans?
So my message to those humans is, under the assumption that people will not all agree to stop building them, which I think is unlikely because of all the good they can do, under that assumption, they will continue to build them. And you should put comparable amount of effort into making them better and understanding how to keep them under control. That's the only advice I have. And at present, is not comparable effort going into those things.
What would you say about your concerns around a potential Star Wars future, which to me seems much more likely given the way that we're already using these systems?
So the idea that we'll just replicate what we've got now, which is a few rich people who control everything and a lot of poor people who do the work, except for the people who develop AI who do the work and are quite rich. But I just think that system is bad, and I think the answer to that system is tax the rich. When you have a different species like these digital intelligences, prejudice is going to be much easier, right? There's going to be much less sympathy for them. So I don't know what to do about that. But forget about digital intelligence. We've already got a huge problem that a tiny fraction of the population has all the power. And what we need is socialism. I actually got invited to Downing Street to give advice to Rishi Sunak's chief policy advisor. There was a very intelligent woman called Shawcross. And I basically gave her the same advice, but I'm not sure she'll follow it. Yeah, so all of us are used to being the apex intelligence and thinking of other things like computers. We can sort of study, and we're smarter, we know what's going on. And just dealing with something that might be smarter than you, but is completely different from you, is something we're not used to. And I agree with you. I mean, if they're smarter than us already, they may well decide to sort of act dumb and fool us. Like I say, I haven't had time to think about this much and haven't had time to react to it emotionally much. I still can't take this seriously emotionally. And I think most people can't take it seriously emotionally. But it's a whole different world when you're dealing with things more intelligent than you.
I'm keen on hearing for the direct interventions on weights of models. What are the most promising research avenues or
for getting rid of bias?
And yeah, directly injecting knowledge into systems.
Making it unbiased, right? Again, I'm not an expert on how you do that. Lots of people know hugely more than me about how you try and get rid of bias in these systems. All I wanted to do was just comment on the fact that at least you can do something with them you can't do with people, which is stop them changing as you study them to try and assess their bias. With people, it's hopeless.